Revenant is one of the most popular Warframes. Simply press one button and become completely immortal. That is why many players find him to be a boring one-trick pony. However, there's actually so much more to him. So, with Revenant Prime now being freshly back in the Resurgence rotation, I revisited him, updated my builds, and I even managed to finally make his spin to win attack Steel Path viable. Big shoutouts to all our generous channel members, and now let's jump right into it. But as per usual, you know the drill. First things first, let's talk about his abilities, starting out with the passive. Whenever Revenant shields completely deplete, he will deal a whopping 100 blast damage and a little AoE around him. On top of that, because he is the Eidolon frame, he also doesn't take magnetic procs whenever he touches water at night in the plains of Eidolon. So yeah, how about we forget about the passive and just move on to the things that actually matter. Ability number 1 is called Enthrall, and when we take a look at the wiki article, then this looks like a crazy complex skill. However, in my opinion, most of this doesn't matter and the ability is actually pretty straightforward. When you cast this at an enemy, he will turn them into a thrall. This means that they are now going to fight on your side against their fellow brothers and sisters. You can have at max 7 thralls on the field at the same time, and the good thing is you don't have to cast it 7 times individually. No, the thralls will quote-unquote infect other enemies automatically over time. Now, as I said, there are a lot more details as to what this ability can do, but I personally don't think it's all too important, so we're gonna skip over it right here. If you want to, you can pause the video and read the entire description. Overall, the damage that your thralls inflict on other enemies, that's really nothing to write home about. However, it is nice to cause a bit of havoc and distract enemies. The main reason though why you would want to use Enthrall in the first place, and the biggest selling point, is the augment Thrall Pact. For every thrall on the battlefield, you gain 25% primary weapon damage. With the maximum of 7 thralls, this would be 175%. However, these 25%, that's just the base value and it scales with ability strength, so you can get quite some base damage out of this for your weapon of choice. You just gotta be careful to not accidentally take out your own thralls all the time. Ability number 2, Mesmer Skin, Revenant's bread and butter and basically the main reason why I would want to play him in the first place. You press the ability button and then you will see a number of stacks appearing over the ability symbol in the bottom right corner of the screen. From now on, whenever an enemy hits you, you're not going to take any damage at all, but instead, you're just going to consume one of these stacks. This is one of the strongest and most consistent survivability tools in the entire game because it does not care about how much damage you're eating. If you get hit by a level 1 butcher, that's 1 stack. If you get hit by a level 100 butcher, that's 1 stack too, and if you were able to scale up the simulacrum to level cap, then even a level cap enemy would only take away 1 stack. As long as it's up, you are completely and absolutely invincible against everything the game can throw at you. I should say though, however, when you recast it to refresh your stacks, during the casting animation, you're not protected from it, so you gotta be a bit careful as to when exactly you cast the skill again. Mesmer Skin has an augment as well called Mesmer Shield, and depending on your gameplay situation, this might either be completely irrelevant or very strong and busted. Let me explain. The augment itself makes it that your Mesmer Skin gains 50% more strength. What that means is you don't have to increase your ability strength on Revenant all that much anymore to gain enough Mesmer Skin stacks, because the augment will increase the quote-unquote ability strength for that very skill. On top of that though, Revenant will also give 5 Mesmer Skin charges to all allies within affinity range. Affinity range, this is 50 meters by default, and it can't be manipulated by ability range, meaning even if you go negative on Revenant, you're still gonna have this massive 50 meter AoE for your team. So yeah, my personal opinion on this augment is, if you play in a team and you want to make sure that nobody dies, especially in like Archimedia or more difficult content, then Mesmer Shield can be absolutely overpowered. However, if you play solo, I don't think it's really necessary because generally you want to build Revenant for maximum ability strength anyway, so you kind of don't need an augment that allows you to go lower on ability strength. Skill number 3 goes by the name Reave, and I personally think this one is massively underrated. At base, what the skill does is pretty straightforward. You turn into a sort of cloud wall and dash forward for a while. Every enemy that you pass through as this cloud wall then will lose a certain percentage of their maximum health and shields. And this is exactly the kicker of this ability. Reave does not deal a certain amount of damage, no, it takes away a percentage of the maximum hit points of the enemy. What that means is that regardless of enemy level, no matter how much health they have, they always lose the same portion of their maximum health. This, by the way, is also the reason why Revenant is easily able to just one-hit even level cap enemies, no issue. And don't worry, we're gonna have a build for that later in the video too. Now, one thing that I need to make very clear with this ability is that the text on the ability card is a bit confusing. Right here, it tells you how much percent of the enemy health you will reduce when you pass through them. Thing is though that this is kinda sort of a lie. In reality, at base strength, you will only ever take away 8% of the enemy health. The reason why the percentage on the ability card is much higher is that there's a synergy between Enthrall, your first ability, and Reave. If you Reave through an enthralled enemy, then that enemy is going to take more damage than a normal one. And that is exactly the percentage that it shows right here, the percentage of damage that you deal to enthralled enemies, not every enemy. Now, Reave also has a synergy with your first and your second ability in the way that if you Reave through a enthralled enemy, then you will regain a charge for your Mesmer skin. In my personal opinion, this doesn't really matter all that much in practice, at least I've never had to use this synergy, but I still wanted to mention it. Just one more thing I need to mention. While yes, this percentage health drain does apply to most enemies in the game and even overguarded units and Eximus, boss enemies and stronger type elite foes that have some sort of damage attenuation, those enemies, for them it works a little bit different, right? You're not going to be able to one-hit a Kuva Lich or an Acolyte or a Necromech. That will still take a couple more hits. Now, Reave also has an augment called Blinding Reave, which makes it that Reave itself gets a bit more ability range, aka this cloud wall is a bit thicker and wider, and it also makes that enemies hit by this cloud wall will be blinded for some time. If you ask me personally, I don't think this augment is really worth it. And last but not least, let's talk about his fourth ability, the one that will be the favorite of every French-speaking person out there, Danse Macabre. When you press the ability button, Revenant will start to spin around in a circle and shoot out laser beams out of his fingertips, covering the entire 360-degree radius around him. These laser beams have a fixed range of 100 meters that can't be influenced in any way, shape, or form, and the radius thing on the ability card, that actually only refers to the thickness of the beams, and in my opinion, doesn't matter at all, right? For this skill, you don't need to mod into ability range, it completely does not matter. Now, when these beams hit enemies, they will deal damage, and the cool thing about this is that they adapt their damage type to the enemy faction that you're going up against. So if you hit an enemy that is armored, it will automatically deal corrosive damage. If you hit an enemy that is shielded, deal magnetic damage. And if you go up against infested, then it will automatically deal gas. All of this with a 20% status chance. You can also quote-unquote supercharge this ability by holding down the fire button while you're rotating. This will then drain more energy per second, but it will also increase the damage and double the status chance to 40%. Now, one last thing that I would like to say here is that while you are in Danse Macabre, you can still use your Reave, which I think is very nice because it allows you to quickly reposition without having to and then reactivate the skill. And as always, if you could leave a quick like for the video, that will be really helpful with the YouTube algorithm, so thank you so much for your support. But now that we know how Revenant works, let's finally start talking about the builds, and the first build that I want to go over here would be a low investment beginner or budget option. Revenant is oftentimes the Warframe that players resort to when they really start struggling with content. So I could imagine that a lot of potentially newer players would want to have a build for him, and this is exactly what we have here. The first thing that I have to mention here is that on this Revenant, I have 5 Tauforged red shards for ability strength, for reasons that we're gonna get into later with the Steel Path builds. That has nothing to do with the beginner build though, so if you see the ability strength here being much higher than it should be, just pretend that this is saying 130%, okay? Okay. So yeah, the beginner build, I'm gonna keep it very short. Aura is completely flexible, just use whatever you personally see fit. The build itself then has a healthy mix of all 4 values, even though I should say that your priority will be to go for as much strength as possible. For a very early beginner, Intensify is going to be your only ability strength source that you're going to be having access to. However, as you get into the Corrupted missions, where you can farm the Corrupted mods like Blind Rage or Transient Fortitude, these 2 right here are going to be your first picks in order to buff up the strength of this build. Farm Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude as early as possible so you can increase your ability strength and therefore the amount of Mesmer skin charges that you get. Rest of the build is pretty self-explanatory. We'll go with Flow for more maximum energy, Equilibrium for the energy income, and Streamline because especially early in the game, you might want to have that extra bit of efficiency to be able to always cast Mesmer skin when it goes down to 0. One thing that in my opinion is a bit more flexible would be Stretch because genuinely most abilities in your kit sort of don't really need it. And also Mesmer Shield right here. I only use this because it will give more strength to my Mesmer skin, which is very needed if Intensify is the only strength source that you have. But later, as you get into Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude, you will not need this one right here anymore. But okay, now it is time to get into the Steel Path builds. And for Steel Path, I have 3 completely different playstyles and setups prepared for you. One will be your classical Immortal Gunrunner, another one is going to focus on Reave and one-hitting all the enemies, and number 3 is brand new 2026, only became possible with the last update, and this one is the build that finally makes your spin to win, your Danse Macabre, finally makes that Steel Path viable and actually really darn strong. For the time being though, let's start out with the build that probably most players are going to use on Revenant, the Immortal Gunrunner. For this one though, I actually have 3 different sub-variants prepared for you, depending on what type of content you play with your Revenant. Don't worry, you're gonna understand exactly what I mean as we get into the mods. First of all though, let's talk helmet abilities. And for this one, it's actually really darn simple, right? It's a Gunrunner build, so you absolutely 100% do whatever you personally like. You can go for Oven Eyes if you want to have like light strip away enemy armor. You can go for Roar, Nourish because Roar and Nourish are always the most used subzooms. I'm not gonna give you any specific loadouts that you have to use. And since whoever says helmet also needs to say Archon shards, let's take a look at that here too. Now, for these shards right here, right, these are all experimental because I'm testing a lot of different builds. None of this, and I mean none of this, is needed for the Gunrunner build. To be fair, if you wanted to build Revenant into purely gunrunning, you would probably go for something like a primary status chance if you're going for a primary, or a secondary crit chance if you rather go for a secondary. You also might go into green shards for armor stripping through corrosive. What I'm trying to say here is, also here, just like with the helmet, you're completely free to go for whatever you like. Let's now though talk about the build, and when we take a look at it, there's not really all too much surprising here, right? We're Revenant, so what we want is as much ability strength as possible. More strength means more Mesmer skin charges, and also because we use Aurora as a subzoom, more strength means more damage on our weapon. So in the Aura, we go for Growing Power. We go for Precision Intensify to make sure that Roar is even stronger. I think Mesmer skin is fine, right? Precision Intensify just amps up the damage output more. And then the standard stuff like Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude. I even went for Augur Secrets to buff the damage even further, right? It is a pretty strong setup. Energy economy comes from Flow as well as Arcane Energize. However, if you don't have Energize, that is no problem. You can also just swap out Augur Secrets for something like Equilibrium right here, if you had the mod capacity that is, and then use something else for the Arcane entirely. Maybe Mold Augmented to buff your strength up even further so Roar gives you even more damage, right? What I'm saying here is your focus will be ability strength mostly and buffing up your weapon as much as you can. Now, one thing that I do want to talk about very, very specifically though is this mod right here, Health Conversion. You're probably wondering what the heck is going on with you? Why would I need armor on a constantly invincible frame? Well, this actually has to do with weapon buffing as well. See, Most arcanes on your primary weapons that will give us more base damage are reliant on some stacks, right? Primary Deadhead needs you to get headshot kills. Primary Merciless, where is it, needs you to get kills in general. And all these arcanes need to be stacked up. In normal mission gameplay, that's usually not too much of a problem, but oftentimes in like boss situations where you are up against one foe and no trash enemies are around, these arcanes can fall flat on their faces because you don't have mobs around that you can stack them up on. This is why one of my favorite primary weapon arcanes is Primary Bulwark. This one doesn't need any stacks whatsoever, it just gives you up to 500 fat% more base damage, and all you need to have for it is armor. So yeah, with health conversion on our Revenant, this will give us a total of 1485 armor, and that means plus 485% base damage on Primary Bulwark all the time. The great thing here is that usually whenever you take a hit, you lose the stacks from health conversion, but that's actually not the case for Revenant, because Mesmer skin protects you from ever taking that hit in the first place. So this one will basically be maxed out all the time, and you have this juicy damage buff without needing any external stacks or sources or whatsoever. It's just pure consistency, and I love it. However, we can go even further. We can go for something like Gunrunner Build 2 right here. This one uses the augment Enthrall Pact for our first ability. By the way, the reason why it is rank 0 is because also my mod capacity here, and I was not willing to do another forma on this one, but just imagine this one here is maxed out. On this build right here, what we do is we go for even more ability strength by using Mold Augmented. In combination with that, we use Enthrall Pact, which on top of the 500% base damage that we're gaining through health conversion and Primary Bulwark, this one now will also give us a massive amount of damage for every thrall on the field. So whatever you read here, times 7. And this one would be even stronger if the mod was actually maxed out. What I'm trying to say is, this one will have another source of buffing your base damage in the form of Enthrall Pact. It sacrifices some convenience with lower ability duration, so you'll have to recast your skills a bit more often, but therefore it maximizes your potential damage even further. And then lastly, I have a third version of this build, and this time not with Roar but with Nourish. Here we have the benefit that we are completely energy autonomous, because the only source of energy we have is Energy Nexus, which gives us 3 energy per second, but it is massively multiplied by Nourish into more like 10 energy per second if everything is stacked up. This way, we don't need to rely on energy orbs, we don't need to rely on companions, equilibrium, whatever, right? If we are in a boss situation where we don't have any access to that, Energy Nexus and Nourish will always have us covered, and we will always have enough energy to recast Mesmer skin and keep ourselves invincible whenever we need it. Alright though, up next I want to go for a much flashier build that is completely ridiculous because it is literally able to one-hit level cap enemies even over guarded Eximus units. Let's talk about the one-hit Reave build. And yes, the fun part is that I actually have a separate Revenant with different Archon shards just to make this whole thing work. Let's talk about it. Now, before we get into the build itself, I want to very clearly explain what my goal for this build was. As I said, we're trying to one-hit every non-damage attenuation enemy in the game. And usually, that's actually not really all that special with Revenant. All we need to do is have around 300% ability strength, prime the enemy with 10 viral procs, and then our Reave will always one-hit them. The main difference with the build that I'm gonna show you now is that you don't have to do this extra step with the viral priming anymore at all. You will be able to just press Reave without any viral priming whatsoever all the time. Pure convenience. So yeah, also here, let's first talk about Helminth's abilities, and this is gonna be very straightforward, right? We need to use Roar. There is no other way to make this build work other than Roar. Reason for that is that we need to get as much damage out of Reave as possible, and Roar is just the best way to do that. Then, let's go to the Archon shards. Also here, it is unfortunately necessary, if you want to forego the viral priming altogether, that you go for 5 Tau Forged Red ones all into ability strength. Next, let's talk about the build itself. And also here, it is pretty straightforward. We need to max out our ability strength as much as humanly possible. Growing Power, Power Drift, Mold Augmented, Augur Secrets, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, and Umbral Intensify. Everything into strength, no compromises. Now, you might think, why are we using Umbral Intensify and not Precision Intensify? Because technically, Precision Intensify would give our Roar even more damage bonus. Well, the reason for that is actually pretty simple, and it is that we rather have less ability strength, but therefore affect both Reave and Roar, rather than taking away even more ability strength from Reave in order to buff up Roar. I've tested both variants, and with Precision Intensify, Reave was not possible to one-hit. With Umbral Intensify, it was. So yeah, so much for the ability strength. One more thing that I want to explain here would be Stretch, because Stretch is pretty nice as it makes the fog wall of Reave bigger, and therefore we hit more enemies with it. If you have the mod capacity, you can by the way also go for Archon Stretch, which has the potential to give you a little bit more energy income. One thing that I would highly recommend though would be Streamline, because more ability efficiency is always nice, as this is quite the spam heavy build. But, and this is the big but with this skill, even at 412% ability strength and almost 500% if everything that we have here is stacked up, this is unfortunately still not enough to make Reave one hit. We need one more additional step, and that would be the Grimoire as our secondary. I think all of us already know what the Grimoire is, right? It's a tome-type weapon, and if you shoot the alt fire, you can activate these mods here that will give you up to 60% additional ability strength. And this right here is what makes the whole build click. I mean, yes, technically there is also the Macabre Focus School, and the Macabre Focus School can give you even more ability strength, but I personally think that the Grimoire is just more convenient to use in day-to-day gameplay, and really we don't need even more ability strength after using the Grimoire. So let me show you how this whole thing is gonna work in practice. First of all, you want to have your Mold Augmented stacked up to 250 times like I have in the background. Then you want to fire the alt fire of your Grimoire into a group of enemies to get the 60% ability strength boost like you see in the top right corner there. This will also activate the growing power boost right next to it. Now we have the maximum possible ability strength. While both of these buffs are active, we want to cast our Roar. Now it must be at 167%. And the great thing is that Roar will stay at 167% even when all the other buffs have already run out, because we don't need these other buffs to stay active. We only need Roar, and that is it. Now, as long as Roar is on, you can simply use Reave, and all the enemies will instantly die in one hit. That's it. You don't need to activate anything else, you don't need to do absolutely anything whatsoever. The only thing that you gotta do is, once Roar runs out, like we see right now, activate the alt fire again to stack up the two buffs, and then reactivate Roar, and now you're good to go for another like 35 seconds and Reave through absolutely everything, take it out in one go. Now, to be 100% fair though, this is a very high investment build with all these Archon shards and all the ability strength, and it is only for the convenience of not having to do viral priming. If, however, you're perfectly okay with viral priming, then you can go for something like this here. This is kind of sort of the same idea, just that here we use viral priming with like a secondary or maybe a Panzervolpaphyla, and then we don't need the Archon shards and we don't need all that much ability strength, and it's also going to be perfectly fine. And now, last but definitely not least, let's talk about the brand new 2026 Spin to Win build. This one, I absolutely love it, and it makes his Danse Macabre finally Steel Path viable. As our Subsume ability of choice, we go with the newest helmet ability in the game, Jade Starts from Sirius and Orion. Jade Stars is really cool as it surrounds you with these recharging Jade Stars, and whenever you deal damage to an enemy, either with your weapon or with your ability, these will shoot out towards the affected enemy and deal a heat AoE damage to them and all the enemies that are close to them. The special thing with Jade Stars though is that the status chance is scaling with your ability strength. So if you have more strength, you're going to inflict more heat procs per Jade Star. And that can get very, very strong on high ability strengths. For the Archon shards, I used this on my Revenant that already has the 5 shards for the other build, but you personally don't have to invest that much into ability strength. If you want to, you can go for something like more casting speed, one of those yellow shards might actually be good, or for the energy economy, as you're gonna see when we take a look at the mods, more effectiveness on energy orbs might actually be a pretty decent idea too. What's more important though would be the build on Revenant himself. And before we get into the mods here, I actually want to talk about these 2 arcanes, because we kinda sorta intend to break Jade Stars a little bit with this one. See, in and of itself, Jade Stars is an ability that can't crit. However, for some reason, the developers still gave it a crit chance and crit damage value in the game code. Just that, the crit chance is 0% and the crit damage is 1x. What this means for us though is that we can still go and use flat crit chance buffs like Arcane Avenger to increase that crit chance from 0 to 45%. And we can go and use flat crit damage buffs like Tenacious Bond or Arcane Crepuscular to increase that 1 times crit damage all the way up to 5.2 times. Oopsie. So yeah, that is the reason why for this build we have to go with Arcane Avenger for the crit chance and Arcane Crepuscular for the fat 3x critical damage multiplier. Now, in order to trigger Arcane Avenger, we need to use Combat Discipline as our aura mod. This is because as Revenant we will have Mesmer skin, aka we're not going to take damage, and we need to take some hits in order to trigger this. By the way, ideally, you wouldn't want to go for a max rank Combat Discipline, but like for a rank 0 one if you can afford it with the mod capacity, so that you take less damage per kill. Next though, we need to talk about Arcane Crepuscular. This one is all nice and well with a 3x final crit damage, but we haven't talked about the fact that you have to be invisible, otherwise you don't get this buff. So, how are we gonna do that? Well, this is where our companion comes into play. Here, we use Shade, or alternatively you can use the Huras Kubro, both do the same thing, and the only thing we really need with the entire Shade build and everything is this right here, Ghost. This makes you invisible whenever you're close to enemies, and the invisibility is only broken if there are no enemies nearby, or if you fire a weapon. Great thing though is that with this build, we're constantly gonna go and use our abilities and we don't use our weapon at all, so this invisibility will constantly be on. On top of that, we of course go for Tenacious Bond because it gives us another 1.2 times final crit damage multiplier, and all we need to do to trigger this is to have a companion weapon that has 50% crit chance or more. Rest of the Revenant build then is pretty self-explanatory. We go for a lot of ability strength because more ability strength means more status chance on our Jade Stars, more heat procs inflicted per thrown out Jade Star. Very, very strong. One thing we do need to take a little bit of care for though is our energy economy, because with both of our arcane slots filled, that leaves no space for Arcane Energize, and also with our Shade Companion not really attacking enemies, that means Equilibrium and Synth Deconstruct, the combo that we usually use to generate energy, that kinda sorta doesn't work here either. So what we do instead is, we don't have any energy income economy, but just focus on as much efficiency as possible with fleeting expertise as well as streamline. With those, in Steel Path, usually I get by pretty nicely with, no extra energy income whatsoever. In addition to all the ability strength, I also decided to go for Archon Vitality with this one. Archon Vitality makes it that heat damage from abilities will be applied twice, which should technically turn our Jade Stars from inflicting 3 heat procs per Jade Star to inflicting 6. Unfortunately, that is not how it works. Because Archon Vitality, when combined with Jade Stars, unfortunately only gives 1 additional heat proc per Jade Star. So, in other words, you turn 3 heat procs into 4. Normally, I would say that's not really worth it, but then on the other hand, there's nothing else we can put into this slot. We can't use Blind Rage because it would kill the ability efficiency to the point where we can't sustain the build anymore. I've tested it, it didn't work out. What I'm saying is, this is technically a flex slot if you have something that you really want to put into here, but I personally tested a lot of different mods and Archon Vitality was just the best option I could find. But okay, let me also quickly show how this build would be played in practice. First of all, you wait until your shade turns you invisible. Right now, I am actually invisible. The reason why I'm visible is because of my option settings, but in the top right corner, you will see that Arcane Crepuscular is active and I am invisible. Once you are invisible, activate your Jade Stars for maximum ability strength. Also here, the Jade Stars do exist, I just have black energy color because otherwise it would be a lot on screen. And then, all you gotta do is activate your Danse Macabre. This will then shoot out the Jade Stars to the enemies. You can see enemies are being set on fire left and right. And once the first couple of enemies die, this will trigger, yep, there you see it, Arcane Avenger, and then all the Jade Stars will be critical, and bada bing bada boom, all the enemies are dead. These were, of course, heavy gunners, so very tanky enemies over level 200. You can imagine that in normal gameplay, it will absolutely melt away the enemies. They have zero chance of survival. They will just absolutely drown in heat procs, and it's very, very fun and gives Danse Macabre the juice that it needs to compete in Steel Path. And now also learn everything about the new limited time summer event right here. Big thank you to Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Ondakani02, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Hantakas, Patersader, Boomia1, Zave, Awindai, Zengen, Quax, Blue Regal 98, Hearthwield, Everin 8802, Gabriel Tevez, Yaku Ivan Gonzalez, GE Schnoz, Muffdisk, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.